Oh, I said this on my show last week. There was a stat that got put up on the screen that the Detroit Lions haven't won a playoff game in 30 years. A playoff game. I said if they hired Howie Roseman tomorrow, he could walk on water in Detroit. He would be the greatest single hire in the history of their franchise. And here, people think he's the Antichrist. And to me, you ask, what's the disconnect? I think it's simple. If his name wasn't Howie Roseman and he didn't look the way he looked and talk the way he talked, he would be appreciated more.
You got Mac guys, John McMullen, Jody McDonald here with you on Birds 365 on the JAKIB Media YouTube channel. Hit that like button. Do the sharing thing. Give your boys a little bit of an assist with their algorithm these days. Here to lend a helping hand is our buddy from down the shore, host on his Sports Fast show, 97.3 down the shore. Mike Gill jumps aboard here on Birds 365. MG, been a minute since we last had you on. The Eagles have made some moves, certainly the draft and the signees thereafter. How much better a team of the Philadelphia Eagles than when last we spoke? I'm going to guess about a month ago, maybe 5 weeks, somewhere thereabouts.
Well, morning, guys. And I would say that they are a significantly better team than the one that left the field in Tampa Bay. And, you know, I was going through yesterday on my show, we kind of went through the depth chart to see where, other than the corner and safety spot, which, is obviously something that, as Howie said, they're a little bit more excited than we are. Where do they have a spot where you're like, they're really, I think the biggest question now is the quarterback. They've gotten basically two receivers. The slot spot should be a nice little fun battle with Pascal and Watkins and whatever they do with Reagor. Goddard and the running backs are solid. The offensive line, I mean, their backup offensive line is better than most teams' starting five. The defensive side of the ball, I mean, they're going to throw guys at you. Derek Barnett, who's not very popular, he's going to be like the fifth or sixth guy on the depth chart, was a number one pick, started in, a ton of games. Their linebacking room is going to be like a steel cage match on who's going to get on the field. Other than the one corner and the safety spot, they're very solid. You couldn't say that a year ago where you went around the depth chart and said, well, that guy's good and this guy's good and we got depth here. I think they're significantly better than they were when they left the field.
Oh, optimism. I love it so
mind
early.
you guys, I had them making the playoffs on this very show last year. I was a little bit more optimistic than most.
We had, what did we have, Jody? We had
8. We both thought 8 and 9. They ended up 9 and 8. But 8 and 9 wasn't going to get you in the playoffs, and 9 and 8 did get the Eagles in the playoffs. So give Mike Gill credit. If he said they were going to make the playoffs, they did.
Yeah, all right. I'm going to play devil's advocate. I've been too nice to the Eagles lately. It's time to change, Jody. I'm getting too nice in my old age. You mentioned
Gill's bringing it out of you, coming on talking like the Eagles are going to be in the NFC Championship game here.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Those holes are pretty significant at corner and safety. And I would argue, you're right, there's certain guys, and specifically when the Eagles talk at safety, they're talking about Marcus Epps. And for whatever reason, he's one of those players the fan base hasn't latched on. I always find it interesting to see who they latch on to, who they don't. I think he's their best safety. I think he's better than Anthony Harris, to be honest.
Agreed.
But they do need another safety. They do need another corner. There's also some things people don't think about that they're really, really bad at. Punting. Aaron Cepas, they didn't do anything. They haven't even brought in an undrafted free agent. He was terrible down the stretch last season. Their return game, awful. Now, they did bring in Devin Allen. We'll see. Olympic hurdle guy. They signed the kid from Utah as an undrafted free agent. They're bringing in some competition, but this isn't exactly, Devin Hester or Cordell Patterson. And that's not that big part of a game, so it's not sexy. Coverage teams. That's why they drafted the kid in the 6th round, because they couldn't cover kick to save their lives last year. These are all boring things, but these are things championship teams tend to do well. So when you start talking about potential NFC championship berths, I think things like that could really, really hamper Philadelphia.
Well, and you saw what happened at Green Bay in the NFC Championship. They couldn't. Their special teams were horrible. I'm not saying it's a complete team. The NFC is very watered down. I think it's a much better team than you saw last year. But see my hat here, guys. No offseason. There's no offseason. That means they're not done putting this team together. I think you'll see them much like last year. We talked. If I was doing your show every day, I'm sure it would come up. Who's going to play opposite Slay? Well, until they finally found somebody before training camp started. So I think
we talked about it
every day.
Right. So I think eventually they'll there's some veteran guy who will get released, and you're like, why did that guy get released? And they'll something to that effect. I agree with you, John. Epps is probably the best safety they have. I wouldn't be surprised if they feel pretty comfortable playing Epps. The question is, if Epps or Harris get hurt, their average there, if one of those guys get hurt, then they take a big drop off from an average group. Now, I don't know what everybody's thought is on this, but the concept is adding Jordan Davis and what he brings should help the looks in the secondary and change the roles of the safeties as we saw them last year, so they're not counted on as much to do as much as they had to last year. So Davis, what he brings, I mean, if we remember back to that whole Fletcher Cox, I get paid to rush the passer. Basically, he was trying to ask Fletcher Cox to do what he wants Jordan Davis to do, and Fletcher Cox is saying, well, that's not what I get paid to do. Well, now they drafted a guy that's going to get paid to do what I wanted you to do. Thanks for opening your mouth, big guy. Now you're going to have to watch this guy take up space because that's what we wanted you to do. How does that change the concepts in the secondary? That, to me, is very interesting. Do they feel comfortable enough saying, we don't need a guy. We could use a lesser guy on the outside if we use split concepts out there, because we brought in a bunch of guys that's what they excel in. They might not be guys but that's what kind of style they played in college, and that's what we're going to go with. So I think the Davis thing really changes the dynamics. Whatever perceived conceptions you have of John Gannon probably should go out the window. You can start judging him based on the personnel he has now.
That's fair.
They're renting him, Mike. They're renting him. Remember that.
And this could be the last season of Jonathan Gannon here, so he better get it right this year and open some eyes if he wants to make like all the other Eagles executives in the front office and just get up and leave. I hear what you're saying, but is that good enough? John keeps pointing out Marcus Epps, their best safety. Okay, does that make Marcus Epps good enough? Just because he's better than Anthony Harris, if you're starting with a low bar, how high do you have to raise the bar just to be better than him? I'm still thinking safety's a weak position. A lot of people were optimistic that the Honey Badger could land here. They had the good draft that they had. They brought in a top 12 wide receiver in the game. They were an inviting team to evaluate if you're a free agent. Say, hey, I could join them. We could do things in the playoffs. Honey Badger decided to go home. Howie can preach patience, but what free agent is sitting out there as a safety guy? Steven Nelson was out there all last year. John and I would mention Steven Nelson at least once a show for about a month and a half, if not 2 months. Quarterback 2, Steven Nelson, still available, and boom, they finally got him. And patience was absolutely the right move by Howie. Who are we waiting for at safety?
Well, right now in the free agent market, probably nobody. I mean, you got some veteran guys at corner like a Joe Hayden, who's 34 years old. I think you're more waiting for, some June 1st guys who, Bradbury, his name's being mentioned as being released, guys like that, where you're kind of surprised that, man, they didn't have room for him. Well, they couldn't figure out a way to make it work. And, you're hoping something like that ends up happening. So I agree with you, Jody. This isn't a complete team. But you asked me if they're better than the team that left the field last year. I think it's a significantly better team than the one that left the field in Tampa Bay. Think about how unathletic they were at times at linebacker. TJ Edwards is a good athlete, Alex Singleton's a guy who works hard. They were the last two linebackers that played in a playoff game, for God's sakes. I mean, I'm interested to see. I think that's a huge training camp. Nakobe Dean, who gets paired with who? Is it Dean and Taylor? Is it Kazir White and Dean? You remember the last time I was on, they signed Kazir White. So whenever that was, back in March 18th, 19th, 20th, sometime around there. I'm like a savant with these dates, man. And I love the White signing because it brought them an athlete. All right, well, now what athletes play together? And the amount of different odd fronts I think you can throw. You could have a Jordan Davis eating up space with Fletcher Cox and Barnett and Graham and Sweat. And then don't forget Reddick's hanging around somewhere. And Milton Williams is a kid who showed a lot of promise. Javon Hargrave, I haven't mentioned in that group there. So you might be able to get 5, which means what? I don't have to blitz. I don't have to send guys. We don't have to scream about not blitzing as much because they should have some odd front looks where they get their pressure. And that makes the corners and safeties not have to have as much pressure to cover. So I agree. They need better personnel in the back, but I think their scheme should be more conducive to not having the best personnel, if that makes sense.
All right, let's talk about Howie's strategy for the draft, Mike. And, I applaud it. Targeting, go up a few spots to get Jordan Davis. Then you get the proven producer by trading 18 and a third-round pick for A.J. Brown. Ultimately, though, they lost significant volume in the draft. 10 picks turned into 5. And, from being on the air every day, you have these fans that just want draft picks. I want this guy. This fourth rounder is going to be a star. Then they forget about Kayvon Wallace 3 years down the road, and they say, this fourth-round pick is going to be a star. To me, if you can get difference makers, you get difference makers. But what's your philosophy there?
Totally agree. The world we live in is a what's behind door number 2 world until you don't like what's behind door number 2. And then I want to see what's behind door number 3. And typically we don't want what's behind door number 3 either. We'll say, I'll go back to door number 1 if you'll offer it to me. Nope, that one's out the window. You're stuck with number 3. So I think the only pick I'm a little iffy on, and you mentioned this, John, you were on my show and mentioned Jurgens, is I get it. Jason Kelce liked Jurgens. He endorsed the pick, and they like Jurgens. Jason Kelce should also realize he was a 6th-round pick and that the value of what they possibly could have added in that spot as opposed to taking the heir apparent to the center spot. You could tell me he could play guard. I haven't talked to anybody who thinks that that's accurate. But if you want to try him at guard, great. Have a blast. I didn't find the value there. He might be a 10-year All-Pro. Jason Kelce was too. He was in the 6th round. That's the one pick I'm a little iffy on in terms of value. But I think, I like the Jordan Davis. I know Hamilton was there, but they obviously value what Davis will do for the rest of the defense more than adding the safety. So I'm okay with that. A.J. Brown's, to me, is a no-brainer. I've had some people say, well, you should have just stayed at 18 and taken Treylon Burks. That's I'll take what's behind door number 2 mentality. Give me what's behind door number 1. I don't need to open door number 2. I don't need a bomb blowing up in my face. I already got the car I want right there. So I like that. I think they did a really good job early in the draft. The 2nd-round pick, I'm not in love with the value aspect of it. Might be a good player. Nakobe Dean, he just changes the linebacker room. I talked about who you're going to play together. So I like the strategy they put together in the draft. Now, I'm probably one of the few people that come on this show that has my type of job that I don't have a problem with Howie Roseman. I'm not a Howie hater. I don't think he's been the problem. In fact, I think he showed again. If you had someone else running that draft this weekend, you would have had some boring, vanilla bunch of picks that you would have been like, we're really any better. No, they made a big jump in talent.
Bold move by Howie Roseman for sure. And yeah, between the three of us, there's no Howie haters here. And I will defend the 2nd-round pick of Jurgens. I remember John has gone to this 10 times since last year, and he's 100% right. Last year, the Giants took a wide receiver in the 1st round and came back and took an edge player in the 2nd round. The wide receiver, people said, whoa, he didn't really need to go that high. and the edge guy fell down a little bit because there were question marks. If you just flopped the 2 picks, if they had taken the edge guy in the first and the wide receiver in the second, everyone would have said, hey, good job. Who cares if they both end up on your team? Does it matter where they were actually selected?
No,
so if I tell you Nakobe Dean was their pick in the second round and Jurgens was their pick in the third round, you would have said, Howie Roseman, genius. He hit them both out of the park. Who cares? They both ended up as Eagles. Doesn't matter where they were picked.
Oh, you're right about that. My point is that, I'm not saying Jurgens the player. I'm saying maybe I could have taken someone in the second round. Maybe I get that safety or corner. Now, there wasn't a lot available there. I'll agree with Roseman there that if they did take a safety or corner, they might have been reaching in that spot. I'm just saying value-wise, I think you probably could get a center, maybe where you took K'Ron Johnson I like Calcaterra, actually. So I think he has a shot to make the team and make a little bit of an impact.
Well, let's talk about Howie, Mike, because you obviously, like Jody, cover all Philadelphia sports, and you have seen the struggles of certain other organizations. And the Eagles haven't been great since the Super Bowl championship, but I think the key there is since the Super Bowl championship, they did win one. It seems like every time somebody's looking for a front office executive, Catherine Raish being the latest, the first call is to Philadelphia. Where is the disconnect in this, in the Delaware Valley, in this market with the Eagles fans versus what the rest of the league thinks about Howie Roseman in the Philadelphia Eagles?
Oh, I said this on my show last week. There was a stat that got put up on the screen that the Detroit Lions haven't won a playoff game in 30 years. A playoff game. I said, if they hired Howie Roseman tomorrow, he could walk on water in Detroit. He would be the greatest single hire in the history of their franchise. And here, people think he's the Antichrist. And to me, you ask, what's the disconnect? I think it's simple. If his name wasn't Howie Roseman and he didn't look the way he looked and talk the way he talked, he would be appreciated more. People simply say, there's no way that guy knows anything about football. And he's not a football guy. That's what it comes down to. If his name was Joe Douglas, for instance, and had a beard and he was a little heftier, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But because he doesn't look like the part, I think people in Philadelphia just can't connect with him. Because, as I said, Detroit hasn't won a playoff game in 30 years. Think about all the yahoos that they have run through that front office trying to win one playoff game, let alone a Super Bowl, following up the Super Bowl with division championships on years where you're starting to decline, going through a rebuild, making the playoffs in the rebuild, being where you are now, where you're watching a show like Birds 365 every day of the week because you have a team that you believe can win. Why? Because the same guy has been in place for most of this. Consistency wins. You don't win a championship every year. Look at Pittsburgh. They're probably, thinking, what are we going to do now that we've got to replace Colbert? This guy's been here. They don't win the Super Bowl every year. They don't make they do make the playoffs a lot of those years, but very similar to the Eagles, very consistent because they have consistency in that spot.
Mike G, let me ask you about the dynamic that is the Eagles offense. We know what happened last year. They came in, they wanted to throw the football. They weren't as effective at it as they thought they were going to be, had the losing record early. It dawned on Nick Sirianni, we're actually more effective when we just go mano a mano and run the ball. They did it effectively. They got to be the best running team in the National Football League, and it helped get them into the playoffs. But the overall belief of the philosophy of the organization is, you want to win another championship, we got to be able to throw the football. So they're going to this year. That's why they laid out the $25 million for A.J. Brown. He's going to get his certainly looks and his catches. What effect does it have on Devonta Smith? Last year was tough for him. He's a rookie coming in. He's already their number one wide receiver and the guy that you're trying to get the ball to, if not forcing the ball to. If you make A.J. Brown your one, and the numbers will dictate as to their actual ranking, but on paper, you'd say A.J. Brown, 3 years under his belt, damn good production is number one. How does it play for Devonta Smith next year at the start of the season?
Well, I would imagine he's going to get a lot more looks at somebody's number 2 guy as opposed to last year where he was the only guy in the whole offense on the outside that you had to worry about. I think it plays well. The question is, how do they disperse the targets for Brown and Smith? Are they going to be 2 guys who get 900 yards each, something to that effect? Or do they throw enough where both those guys, they haven't had a receiver over 1,000 yards since 2014. I mean, so it's amazing to hear that in the receiving game, but I think Smith ends up really prospering in this situation. I think he's a guy who's going to be he's a very polished receiver to begin with coming into the league, but very frail and small, and I think had a little feeling out point. But now having Brown, from all accounts from the people you talk to in Tennessee, this guy was their offense. He was the leader in that room, and he's a guy who I think is going to help Smith exponentially as a pro, not talent-wise. The kid has a ton of talent. The guy that I'm interested in, and I know this is going to sound crazy, see a lot of parallels with Reagor, where Aguilar was. Aguilar was the first-round pick number 20. He was a whipping boy for 2 years. He was the guy that we wanted behind door number 3. Get him out. They moved him subtly to the slot that 3rd year, and he really was a key part of that Super Bowl offense.
Especially in the Super Bowl.
And then Super Bowl.
Game in the Super Bowl.
Reagor has talent. Let's not sit here and say he has no talent. He's been horrible. But maybe you just put him in the slot and say, you're the 3rd guy. You're going to run simple curls. We're going to get you the ball where you can catch and turn up the field, and that's your role on this team. So remember Aguilar, he was horrible for 2 years, but they got something out of him in that 3rd year. And I'm not even saying Reagor's going to make the team or be here or win that role. Watkins, Pascal, Reagor might be behind all those guys. But I hope instead of scrubbing your your social media,
he blocked me. I got blocked by 2 receivers this week, Mike.
That's awesome.
I'm getting a complex, man.
Instead of following the leader and scrubbing your social media, take it as I haven't been good enough, but look what they brought in. I can be a part of this and be a part of it instead of crying about it. That's what I hope for him. I don't envision it, but that's my hope.
Real quick, just to let the listeners know, and I know Jody's interested in this, Mexico City, it is going to be the San Francisco 49ers in the Arizona Cardinals. So no Eagles in Mexico City. But you did mention at the start of this conversation, Mike, maybe the biggest question mark on this team and the improvement is the quarterback. It's interesting where one move, in the case of A.J. Brown, all the dominoes fall into place. As you mentioned, all of a sudden, Devonta Smith he doesn't have to be a wide receiver 1. He's not going to get that best corner on the opposing team, at least early in the season, and he's going to see more single coverage. All of a sudden, you're worried about Quez Watkins as a 3rd receiver, as a 2nd receiver, as that 3rd one. You can just run by people. He's never going to see a double team in his life. Dallas Goedert's a top 5 tight end. They have a top 5 offensive line. Miles Sanders is on a contract year. This team loves Kenny Gainwell. They have every single piece in place on the offensive side of the football. How long are you going to give Jalen Hurts in this upcoming season before all right, this is our guy, or we got to go in a different direction come to 2023 offseason?
Yeah, I think that's a good question because I think you're right. This is all now. Hey, you have the line, you have a running game, you got the top 5 tight end, you got 2 weapons, we even got you a pretty talented group of slot guys. Now you have to make the plays. When is the threshold of you're not making enough plays? That's a tough one. I mean, do you say, hey, 8 games in, hey, we're the offense?
Well, and by the way, I'm not saying he's going to get benched. He's going to play the whole season. But when are the Eagles going to know this is our guy? That to me is different.
Oh, I agree. I think it's this year. Like, if he doesn't perform this year, I don't think you get another. Because as you talked about the last time I was on the show, which was pretty eye-opening, you got to worry about paying this guy $30 million.
Yeah.
So if he's struggling along in this offense, I can't pay him 30. Not to mention, I mean, I think it's set up pretty well that if he doesn't play well, they've got 2 draft picks. You got quarterbacks in next year's draft. I think this is all on him right now. You perform, you get your $30 million, you're behind door number 1. We don't have to worry about door number 2. You don't perform, well, now those doors start to get put up, and everybody's going to want to pick one of those doors and not the door you're behind. So I would think that this is it. This is his year. It's sadly, it's not like it used to be where you get 5 years to show that you can play in this league. I think this is the year for him. And if he doesn't play, we'll probably be talking in the draft next year about moving up to try to, because I don't think they'll be 4 and
no, they're not going to be bad enough to be in a good position. So Howie's going to have to work some magic.
Yeah.
If that's the case.
But we'll see how it shakes out as far as the other teams go. And we got a long way to go before we get the next year's draft. But I want to ask another Jalen Hurts question. I think we all have a pretty good grasp on it. We'd love to be able to say week 8, week 10, that's the week. Will judgment, well, that's a fluid situation too. I don't know that anyone knows exactly how it's going to play itself out, but it is certainly the judgment year for the quarterback. How much pressure does he feel because of that? This past year, he's taken over for Carson Wentz, who had talked his way out of town, was not a very popular quarterback when he left town. I don't want to say he was under no pressure, but it was minimal pressure because he's a second-round draft pick, was picked to be a backup, who's now being thrust in as a starter. This year is a very different dynamic. How do you think Jalen Hurts performs under the pressure that will be this season for him?
I think that's what they like about him, Jody, is this guy is unflappable. That's what everybody's liked about him. That's the one thing I think you don't have to worry about. He might be under pressure, but I don't think he's going to show it or let you know it. That's been his MO, going back to Alabama, bench, backup, transferred, starts at Oklahoma, be the backup. That's his story. And for whatever reason, when he talks, when he goes to the podium, he doesn't come off of this guy that has this leadership aura around him. To me, anyway. John, you're in the room. I don't know how much you guys are in the room anymore, but when you watch him on TV and he does this post game, that seems very blah. Whatever he does behind those walls that gets these everybody loves the guy. That's all everybody talks about, how much of a leader he is. He must have something innate in him that the Eagles, the front office, the team has said, you're good enough. Because I think by everybody's eyes, they're saying, this guy's okay. I don't think he's horrible, but I don't think he's a all-pro quarterback. He's in the middle of the road. But that they have put so much faith to say, we want you, and we're going to build around you and give you everything you need. Normally it's, if you're not good enough, then we'll find somebody else. But they seem content on keeping him and just getting him better weapons. So is the pressure on him? Sure. But I don't think he cares. I don't think he realizes. I don't know what he doesn't realize it, but I think he just is such a steady Eddie guy that I don't think you're going to see that the pressure is getting to him.
Well, I don't, it's interesting because he is very guarded on the podium. And he's very trained by Nick Saban. They call it rat poison. Don't give in to the rat poison. So he's very cognizant of that. But all the little things, we always talk about his work ethic, and that sort of exudes leadership. Anytime you talk about a player coming in, you always get that question. Has anybody from the team contacted you? With A.J. Brown, it's obvious. The two are friends and blah, blah, blah. You talk to Jordan Davis, who's a defensive player, right? First guy, Jalen Hurts. He's just got this natural leadership ability. And that's something that I think, because I know I do this in my own personal life. I got to get back to this guy, got to get back to this guy. Then I'm doing something else and I forget about it. And all of a sudden it's 2 weeks later and I never got back to him. He's really, really good at keeping people involved. I always say even the 53rd man on the roster, the quarterback has got to be in tune with, because he wants to be involved. And the quarterback is the leader of the team. It's one of the things I think Carson Wentz struggled with. Jalen Hurts includes everybody. It's an interesting dynamic. And I don't know if it's innate or if Nick Saban taught him it, but either or, it's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing to watch.
Yeah, and you figure, take a look at another guy was notoriously thought to be a leader, a guy like Tebow, who did not have great skills. He was in this league because of his leadership ability, and he was a totally different kind of leader on the podium. He was the rah-rah guy. We'll never lose another game. I won't let us happen. So you look at the different leadership qualities, and obviously Tebow couldn't play, and Hurts was kind of in the middle. The Eagles are drawn to that persona or that personality, and maybe some of it is because the taste we have in our mouth from the guy before, I don't want to go back down that road if I have a guy who can lead our troops. So this is a big year for him. There's no question about it. As you see, they have Minshew behind him. If they feel like he just totally isn't the guy, which I don't think that's going to be the case. I mean, I think you have I don't know if is he a top 10 guy? Probably not. Is he a top 15 guy? Maybe. But what he is a productive guy. I don't think people thought Bobby Abreu was some great player, but at the end, you're like, man, this guy had some great stats. Some people think he should be in the Hall of Fame, for God's sakes. So some people's talent just doesn't jump off the page. Everybody wants a first-team All-Pro. If you don't have a first-team, it's like the concept of, I'm a big process guy, but if you don't win the championship, you might as well be the worst. That's how we evaluate players. If you're not an All-Pro, you suck. I don't want just a Pro Bowl guy. I want an All-Pro guy.
That's interesting because, and this will be my last one, listen to Mike each and every afternoon on 97.3 down the shore. The Sports Bass does a phenomenal job down there. You bring up, I call it the Ricky Bobby mentality. If you're not first, you're last.
Yeah.
You guys, this probably you can both answer this because you're on with fans every day. When did that start? Did you see a shift? Because I remember when the regular season meant something in these sports. And if you want to talk about the Sixers, the legendary Sixers-Celtics rivalry, which I think was the best rivalry in sports during the Julius Erving, Larry Bird era. A regular season game meant something. Forget about the playoffs. Now it's we don't have a chance to win the championship. So, and I call it with the Eagles the "we're not ready" crowd, because when they were losing out on players, it was always, and Jody knows this, we're not ready. We're not ready for this player. Well, they weren't ready in 2017. Who thought they were ready? Yeah. What did you see or notice a sea change when fans began to take that Ricky Bobby mentality?
I'd like to see what it's like in other markets every day, because here with the Sixers, it was such a polarizing thing. So to answer your question, John, maybe around 2013, when it was the whole concept of, well, if we're not going to be any good, we're stuck in the middle. The Sixers were stuck in the middle for 20 years. After Iverson's 2001 run, they never got out of the second round. So people were apathetic towards the Sixers. Nobody cared. I always say the process was a business decision to regain interest in the product. It's not about winning championships. You can never guarantee that, but I can guarantee a way to get fans back in my building. So I market this phrase, and the fans came back because they had something that they can.
They didn't come back for 3 years, Mike. Come on.
Bro, no, but it was a gamble of, we're going to get good, and when we do get good, you're going to come back. People acted like, well, you turned your back on the fans, and they're never going to come back. They sell out that building every single night for the last, 5-6 years. They're on television, on national TV.
Mike, not even close. They don't sell out the building every single night.
The Sixers?
No, not even close. They sell out a handful of games.
Well, they're number 2 in attendance in the entire league.
They got a big arena, but it's more of a percentage thing than an overall thing.
Yeah, I mean, look,
they've certainly rebuilt it up. They took it down and they rebuilt it back up. But we've seen
they're better than the Flyers. I'll say that
every day for 3 years.
Which I never thought. By the way, I never thought I would see the day where the Flyers would struggle with attendance, because they had such loyal fans. But here we are.
Yeah. Well,
it's a different era.
So the point that I'm making is, whether they sell out every night or not, the building is electric. It's the place to be. They're going to a Sixer game. It's a tough ticket to get. People want to go. They want to be seen. So the concept of It's like everything. Baseball went down the analytic road. Why? Because they were able to start getting more info. You had more information and more different ways of doing things. So people started, it's like all these fads, launch angle. Okay, well, I'm going to start teaching launch angle, and that's going to be the new thing until somebody figures out a new term to start teaching, and there's a new analytic guy. We kind of grab to these things because there's so much information. We didn't have the information in the past, so we just did it the way that it was for 50, 60 years. Soon as the information started to become more prominent, well, let's see. If my team's stuck in the middle and I just lose, I can get a good player. It might not work, but hey, it's what's behind door number 2. It's like a Seinfeld episode. I came back to door number 2, Jody.
I like it. All right, last one from me, Mike. Under/over touchdowns for the Eagles lead back, Miles Sanders. Let's see. Last year he had none. 0. Goose egg for Miles Sanders. So I'm going to try and be fair and set the number at 7.5.
Ooh, that's a big number, Jody.
It's a big number. I'd say probably under in that situation because Hurts gobbles up a lot of those rushing touchdowns in that area. And you got so many red zone weapons that you might be scoring from 15 yards out now. So I think Sanders has a pretty big year. John mentioned the contract year, but I think you're going to see you're not going to see 7.5 or 7 from him.
Okay, yeah. The reason why I asked who do we have on the other day who said run Miles Sanders into the ground?
Jeff Mosher.
Yeah. Mosher. Yeah, it was Mosher who said
if you're not
gonna re-sign him, you might as well get your money out of him. So I'd pound Miles Sanders every chance I get. That's why
Mosher's a Penn State guy too, so he's got a little rooting interest in mind.
Yeah, if I had asked him, he probably would have said over 7.5. But Mike Gill gave you a slight under. He better get more than he did last year. Let's at least leave it at that. 0. All right, Mr. Gill, always a pleasure, buddy. Appreciate you coming on. Thanks much. We will be back in touch again. Now he's going to commit this date to memory so he knows exactly when we bring him back on the show. When was the last time we had him on the show? Pretty amazing with that. Mike, thanks for hopping on.
All right, guys.
Thanks, Mike.
Take care.
Mike Gill from 97.3 down the shore with the Sports Bash, bashing it up with us here on Birds 365. All right, he's John McMullen. I'm Jody McDonald. Your Mac and Mac Birds 365 coming right back.